The idea of jury nullification has been around since this country had juries. The idea is pretty simple. Juries can vote to acquit defendants even when the government proves its case beyond a reasonable doubt. If you serve on a jury and you listen to all the evidence, then you can still vote not guilty. And you can walk right out of the courthouse and tell everyone that the guy did it, but you didn't care. Maybe you didn't like the law. Maybe you didn't like the prosecutor. Maybe you were just having a bad day. Whatever it is, it's your right to vote to acquit. The defendant will walk, and the judge and the government can't do anything about it. In the history of this country, jury nullification has been especially prominent in periods of open race hatred. During the 19th century, juries often refused to convict people who were accused of helping escape slaves in violation of the Fugitive Slave Act. And later, in the Civil Rights era, some all-white juries would acquit people who clearly committed acts of violence against blacks. So there are clearly good uses of jury nullification, and there are bad uses of it, as you would expect. But on balance, this is a feature, not a bug, of our judicial system. That's the conventional wisdom anyway. What's not conventional wisdom, because no one's talking about it, even on the right, is that jury nullification is making a major comeback right now. And this is not the jury nullification that Supreme Court justices like John Jay endorsed back in the day. I'm talking about a return of the civil rights era of jury nullification, where juries, egged on by prosecutors in some cases, refuse to punish racist criminals who are obviously guilty. Only this time, the criminals are not white, they're black. This is widespread at the moment in this country. It is impossible to deny. We have fully imported South African-style juries where race and caste matters more than the facts of the case. I'm going to start with one of the most egregious recent examples of the jury nullification that I'm talking about. This is a case involving the brutal killing of a 17-year-old white high school student in Akron, Ohio, named Ethan Liming. Now, last summer, Ethan Liming and his friends decided to do some stupid TikTok challenge where they take a toy gel gun and fire it at random people. And here's the police chief in Akron explaining what the gun looks like and what it does. Watch.
Yeah, so the description of this toy, and it's targeted for ages 14 and up, is that you take these little beads, you soak them in water. This is my understanding of it. You soak it in water, and then you load this, what they describe as a toy gun, and it shoots these water beads at people or objects or whatever the target is. When it impacts the target, it, like a water balloon, it explodes, and then the person is doused with water.
Okay, it's important to see what those guns look like, because that is obviously a toy water gun. It's very clearly not a real gun. And so Ethan Liming and his friends, armed with this toy water gun, drove around, and then they came across several young black men, ages 19 to 21, who were playing basketball in a parking lot near LeBron James's I Promise school. And Liming's friends made the very dumb decision to shoot the water pellets at these black men with the toy gun. Now, evidence at trial, which includes surveillance footage, shows that the black men initially ran away thinking that they were under attack, but then, probably when they realized what was actually happening, that they weren't in any, their lives were not in jeopardy, they turned back and they charged at the car that Liming was in. There was testimony that Liming fired some water pellets at the men who were now running at him. The key point here is that this was not a split-second thing where the black men attacked in self-defense thinking the gun was real. They pursued Liming to get back at him for his prank. What happened next is that Ethan Liming died a horrible death. When police arrived, they found blood coming from Liming's mouth, ears, and nose. He hadn't simply been punched in the face and given a black eye, although that's true as well. He had been stomped. He had a broken collarbone. He had multiple blunt force injuries all over his body. The coroner noted that there was a shoe print on his chest. Now, think about the amount of force that's required to leave a shoe print on someone's chest. Think about the savagery involved in that. At trial, the defense argued that Ethan Liming's killers were in fear for their life because of the toy gun. They weren't mad that they'd been pranked. Instead, they were deathly afraid of the water gun, so they went to town. Is that plausible? Well, initially, prosecutors didn't think so. That's why they brought murder charges against the men responsible for this killing, which seems obviously appropriate given the facts of the case, and given that those facts simply don't support a self-defense claim. Again, they pursued him, they assaulted him, and they stomped on him while he was on the ground. It was 3 against 1. And after killing him, they stole his car. So even if we were to accept the outlandish idea that they ran after this guy, still thinking that he was a crazed shooter with a real gun that just so happened to look like a plastic toy gun, well, by the time they were stomping him to death on the ground, it would have been exceedingly clear to everybody involved that he was not a threat. Also keep in mind that at least one of the 3 assailants had been hit in the face with the water pellet, and that couldn't have felt very good, but it does mean that they obviously knew that it was a toy gun. Their lives were not in danger. They stomped him to death and they stole his car because they were angry. And stomping someone to death and killing them because you're mad, that's not a legitimate excuse. At least it's not supposed to be in a civilized society. So this was murder, obviously. But the murder charges didn't last long. Watch.
Police originally charged Deshaun Stafford, his brother Tyler, and their cousin Donovan Jones with murder. But in July, a grand jury indicted them on lesser charges. Liming blames the Summit County Prosecutor's Office for that decision. He doesn't believe all of the facts were presented. Akron police said back in June, race was not a factor in the killing.
There is nothing that we have in our possession right now, any information at all, indicating that race played a role in this homicide. Nothing.
You get the idea. There are a couple things about this. First of all, if the prosecutors had wanted the grand jury to indict on murder charges, they could have done that. That's not really in dispute, especially after the Trump prosecutions, where the grand jury wanted to indict everyone who's ever talked to Trump, and they did. So everyone knows how grand juries work in this country. The saying about a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich because prosecutors can get anybody indicted by a grand jury. There's no defense counsel present. Prosecutors can basically say whatever they want to the grand jury, and they can indict anyone for any crime. So why didn't prosecutors want murder charges here? Why did they effectively downgrade to a much less serious offense, which is involuntary manslaughter? Liming's father spoke to local media about the prosecutor's decision, and he says that at least one prosecutor said that his son got what he deserved in the form of hood justice. Watch.
Between the detectives and the prosecutors, described that prosecutors' meeting as being very contentious. Some of the prosecutors wanting felonious assault charges and murder charges, others basically wanting no charges at all, with one of the prosecutors saying that Ethan received hood justice, which was a new term to me. I was unfamiliar with that terminology, hood justice, and that, I guess, implying that Ethan got what he deserved.
Hood justice. That's from a prosecutor. Now, you can believe what Liming's father says, or you can choose not to believe it. Whatever the case, it's objectively true that involuntary manslaughter is an absurdly lenient charge when you pummel someone on the ground after he fired a water gun at you. Involuntary manslaughter makes sense when you're speeding and you hit somebody in a crosswalk, but when you're standing over somebody with a child's toy, causing blood to come out of every orifice of his body, you're probably committing a voluntary act called murder. At the very least, you'd think that it'd be up to a jury to decide whether it's murder or not. But prosecutors in Akron didn't see it that way, so the murder charge was off the table. And just by doing that, just by removing the prospect of murder from the case, prosecutors sent a very clear signal to jurors. And the signal is that this was all an accident, at worst. Nobody really intended anyone to die. And just to reiterate that point, the prosecutors offered jurors another option, which is that they could also convict the thugs of assault, which is interesting. So you could convict them of assaulting someone until they die, but then not convict them of the actual murder or manslaughter. Well, it doesn't make any sense, but lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. This week, Ethan Liming's killers got off with a conviction for assault. That's it. They were acquitted of involuntary manslaughter. It's as if they just got into a nasty bar fight or something. They stomped somebody to death, and all they're getting is an assault charge. Conviction, rather. So they'll almost certainly be out of jail within 2 years, if not sooner. This is jury nullification encouraged by prosecutors. There's no other term that you can use to describe this, and it's not just happening in Akron. Consider that just a few weeks ago, a jury found that a member of a black nationalist militia named Othel Wallace had committed manslaughter instead of murder after he shot a police officer to death on camera. Wallace shot this officer named Jason Rayner in the head. This was an unprovoked murder. Rayner was responding to a call of suspicious activity in an apartment complex, and Wallace killed him. Again, there's no doubt about that. The murder was caught on body camera. Otha Walsh is not simply a member of a black nationalist, black supremacist group. After executing Jason Rayner, Wallace boasted on Instagram about putting pigs in their place. He fled to Georgia, where his black nationalist group, called NFAC for Not Effing Around Coalition, helped him hide. Wallace also cut his dreadlocks to hide his appearance. And all of this came out in trial. Watch.
And then you say, these crackers and the power I'm speaking to them.
Yeah, but he also said something about me getting banned.
Is Instagram a bunch of crackers?
I'm not sure if it is, but...
You refer to that as law enforcement officers as crackers?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. Well, you refer to law enforcement as pigs, don't you?
No, sir.
In fact, after you killed Officer Rayner or shot him, you went on Instagram and you posted that I'm not going to let these pigs do anything to me, correct? Say it up to them.
I said, yes, I did refer to as pigs, but when I say the word pigs, I'm not specifically always talking about police officers.
What else are you talking about?
I'm talking about people who don't see me as human.
Okay, so when you shot Officer Rayner, you referred to him as a pig, and all the other people as pigs, the officers, correct?
No, not just when I said it again. I'm referring to people who don't see me as human.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, so he shot the police officer and killed him and then talked about pigs, but he wasn't talking about police officers. I mean, you can't imagine. Can you imagine that going the other way? Somebody murders a black man and then later posts on social media using the N-word, and then he's asked about it. Said, well, no, it's unrelated. I didn't say N-word. I mean, that guy could have been referring to anybody. It wasn't really race-based necessarily. Like, there's no way that argument would be bought in court. But after that testimony that you just saw, after shooting a police officer in the face and killing him, Otha Walsh was convicted of manslaughter, not murder, which carries a possible death sentence, manslaughter. The local sheriff said that he was, quote, that he never, quote, he had never been more disgusted by a verdict in his entire career, and you can see why. Vladimir Putin called the U.S. dollar's drop in dominance objective and irreversible as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa formally agreed to use local currencies in trade instead of the U.S. dollar. As demand for the dollar weakens, the buying power of the dollar weakens, and that is why Birch Gold is busier than ever. Investors and savers are looking to harness the power of physical gold held in a tax-sheltered IRA. And you can too. You can protect your IRA or 401k by diversifying with gold from Birch Gold. As the U.S. dollar continues to receive pressure from foreign countries, digital currency, and central banks, arm yourself with information on how to protect your savings. Learn if gold is right for you too. Text Walsh to 989898, and they'll send you a free info kit on gold with an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, and countless 5-star reviews. I trust Birch Gold to help you diversify into gold. If a central bank digital currency ever becomes a reality, it'll be nice to have some gold to depend on. Again, text Walsh to 989898. Again, this is not simply jury nullification. This is race-based jury nullification that prosecutors are encouraging. In some cases, they're not even leaving it to the juries. They're offering murderers really attractive plea deals to short-circuit the whole trial process altogether. Remember the 41-year-old guy in North Dakota named Shannon Brandt? He confessed to killing Kaylor Ellingson, who was a teenager. And why did he do that? Well, Brandt was drunk, and he assumed that when Ellingson was on the phone with his mom, that he was really communicating with some sort of MAGA Republican militia. So Brandt ran Ellingson over with his Ford Explorer, killed him, and then he fled the scene. And that's murder, but Shannon Brandt wasn't charged with murder. Instead, he was hit with manslaughter charges instead. Prosecutors offered him those charges as part of a plea deal, which of course he accepted. And there are many more examples like this. There's the case of James McGee, who used a metal pipe to bludgeon a 62-year-old cab driver named Arif Mohammed Qasim to death back in 2019. He literally beat his brains out. San Francisco's DA at the time let McGee plead to involuntary manslaughter in the name of equity after beating someone to death with a lead pipe. The same thing happened to the killer of Seth Smith, a Berkeley student who was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range by a lifelong criminal named Tony Walker. And the moment that homicide detectives reached out to Walker, he explained that he was frustrated that they cared about Smith's death to begin with. He said, quote, "A white kid gets killed and the damn whole world stops. F that white mother effer." That's what he said to the cops. How did prosecutors respond? Well, they offered Tony Walker a plea of manslaughter. That's despite the fact that a probation officer determined that, quote, "The defendant has demonstrated that he is a danger to the community and needs to be separated for the community's protection. The defendant has established an entrenched pattern of criminal conduct that probation, prison, and parole have been unable to eradicate." Nevertheless, Tony Walker was not brought up on hate crime charges or thrown in prison for life, as he would be if he were white. This was not a repeat of the Ahmaud Arbery case with the races reversed. Instead, prosecutors let Tony Walker take a manslaughter plea. And for good measure, lawmakers in Berkeley later prevented police from running most parolee searches like the one that led cops to apprehend Walker in the first place. And we could go on and on listing examples, but there's one more, very recent one that we need to fit in here. A man named Calvin Ushry. He brutally assaulted, pistol whipped, and robbed a jewelry store owner. And the whole thing was caught on camera, plain as day. But guess what happened at trial? Watch.
New at 11 tonight, a jury could not reach a verdict in a brutal attack and robbery of a Wilmington jewelry store owner. Calvin Ushry was on trial for various charges, including robbery and assault. After 2 days of deliberations, a mistrial was declared. This surveillance video was shown during the trial coming up right here. Prosecutors argued Ushry violently attacked the owner of Solid Gold Jewelers back in September of last year. The owner was so badly beaten, he underwent months of rehabilitation. Prosecutors plan to retry the case.
The jury couldn't reach a verdict. Ushry is on video walking into a jewelry store, grabbing the store owner, pistol whipping him, stomping on his head, and beating him with a hammer before walking off with $100,000 worth of stolen merchandise. He was charged with assault and robbery because, you can see him on camera assaulting and robbing someone. But the jury was deadlocked. They couldn't figure out. They looked at that video and said, I don't know what's happening there. Who knows? It's impossible to tell. Now, we all know why it was deadlocked. There were members of that jury who didn't want to convict a black man, no matter how obviously guilty he was. That's what happened, and we all know it. And this is what's been happening in courtrooms all over the country, without any fanfare whatsoever. The left has targeted conservatives, whether they're politicians or pro-lifers or random people posting memes that offend Hillary Clinton. Everybody knows that. But at the same time, all over the country, the primary voting blocs of the Democratic Party are committing the most heinous crimes imaginable, including murder, only for prosecutors and juries to let them off the hook. They're doing it deliberately. And in the process, they have established a true two-tier justice system, a hierarchy, where the severity of a crime is judged based on the demographics of those involved. And the lives of victims are ranked based on their race and their politics. Sadly for the family of Ethan Liming, he falls at the bottom of that totem pole, which means that there will be no justice for him because we are no longer a country that believes in justice. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.